Okay, welcome to Pause and Pivot Cafecito Chat. I'm Margarita V, and today I'm here with my co-hosts, Colin, Urchina, and Gordon. So we'll introduce everyone in just a moment, but first, a quick overview of today's conversation. Today we're exploring big ideas from this amazing book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. Oh my goodness, it is such a goodie. Let's see, when was this one? This was in 2016. I think it was a reprint. Yeah, this is a 2016, originally 2006. And it took about 7 hours for me to read. So there's so much goodness to share here because, many of us think our abilities define what we're capable of. But this book invites us to consider something different. That what really shapes our lives is what we believe about those abilities. So in today's chat, we're going to be exploring 3 ideas on this book, Mindset. Number 1, how our beliefs shape our reality. Number 2, how growth depends on how we respond to challenge. And number 3, how mindset influences our relationships, culture, and leadership. And what makes this space unique here in our Cafecito Chat is that we don't just read books, we pause. We come together and we reflect. We explore how these ideas are actually showing up in real life. So we invite you, pull up a comfy chair and join us. And if this kind of conversation resonates with you, we invite you to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, like, and share so more people can join us each week. You can also download the QR code that we're going to share. So you can download the weekly reflection worksheet. So you can follow along and jot down your big insights, your takeaways. So remember to subscribe to our newsletter for future sessions and additional resources. And as you listen, just notice what resonates. Sometimes just one idea is enough to shift something meaningful here. So for today's conversation, we're going to dive into this book, and let's go ahead and check in with our co-host just to see what are you curious about to explore about this book today.
Well, one of the things that really struck me as I was reviewing the book about power of habits from our last conversation, and I thought, oh my gosh, this idea of going from autopilot to conscious choice. And now this one seems perfect because it's like, okay, so now how do I orient to the growth potential in any given moment, which is another level of consciousness. And as a coach, I'm always looking for how can I sense that emerging with a client when I'm working with them. So that's kind of what I'm interested in exploring today.
Yes, awesome. Love it. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of these kind of ideas. I like you said, Gordon, with the book last week and now this, it's what I work on all the time is mindset. And some of the big ideas you've identified hit hard for me. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. But at the end of the day, it's that realization that I'm creating inside the perceived reality from inside my mindset. And it's at times a little disconcerting, but it's also hopeful because I can change.
Love it. That internal discernment, awareness of it. Sweet.
I am so grateful that we're reviewing this book again because this was one of the first books that you introduced me to years ago when we met in Clubhouse. And it was game-changing for me, game-changing. And it's now interesting years later, 5 years later, I'm still in that growth mindset. So it's fascinating. So it's also fascinating to meet myself here 5 years later and to see that I'm still learning. So I guess I'm still practicing a growth mindset. So thank you so much.
I love it. And that's what we do here, right? We don't just read books. We're recognizing the magic that happens when we actually share the insight and we look for ways to apply it into our everyday life. So thank you all for your shares and your curiosity. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at a brief overview of the book and the author. Okay, so this book is one of those foundational texts, really, that we have all shared right now that has influenced us in so many ways and in areas such as education and leadership, performance, and even parenting. So, what I love about it is that it takes something that we often assume is fixed, meaning our intelligence or our abilities, and completely reframes it. So today, we're not just talking about this idea of what our thoughts are, but mindset as a concept. We're really exploring how our thinking patterns shape our experience of life. So welcome to Mindset, the New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. Now, this book, amazing. At its core, this book is about a shift in how we see ourselves and therefore how we also see others. Most of us grow up in environments where we're rewarded for being smart or being good at something, maybe even naturally. So we start to build an identity around that, how others see us. But Dweck invites us to move from proving who we are or achieving, having an identity from achievement orientation, to exploring our becoming who we can be. And that shift changes everything from how we approach learning, our attitudes about effort and failure, and our concepts of self and growth. So with this amazing book, let's take a look at Carol. And this is my first attempt at using AI for her image. So I'm having so much fun with AI. Carol Dweck, huge admirer. She is a Stanford psychologist who spent decades studying motivation, learning, and development. Her work is grounded in research. Again, decades of research, and each of the books, each of the pages are just so rich with so many stories and studies and findings. But what makes it so powerful is how practical and applicable it is. Her mindset theory has been used in many different areas, such as schools, organizations, sports, and leadership development, because it gives us a simple but profound lens. So basically, how we think about our abilities, our innate abilities, or the potential of our abilities, just this perception about ability can really bring about and hugely shape how we show up in life. So with that brief overview of the book and the author, let's go ahead and look at the overview of the three big ideas we're going to look at today. And that is around the idea of how beliefs are connected to our behaviors, how we show up, and then how that turns into our outcomes. So number one, we're going to look at our beliefs shape our reality. Number two, growth through challenge. And number three, mindsets shape of everything in our life, including relationships, culture, and leadership. And again, so instead of just focusing on outcomes, the book invites us to look upstream at the beliefs driving everything. So let's start with our big idea number one. If you want to take out a piece of paper or your journal or bring out your reflection worksheet for the week. So the first big idea is that our beliefs shape our reality. Dweck introduces the concept of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And very simply, in a fixed mindset, she puts forth that we believe our abilities to be set, static, already established. So we focus basically on ways to prove and reprove those abilities. And in a growth mindset, the belief is that our abilities and those abilities of others can develop. So we focus on learning and improving. And what's important is that we don't just have one mindset. She really points out in several different case studies that everyone has fixed mindset and growth mindset in different areas of their life. So it's really awesome to think about that. Where might we have more of a fixed mindset, showing up with more of that static image of our performance or identity? And where might we have more of that growth mind shift, that growth mindset? So we shift depending on the situation. And that's really great to keep in mind. And just being aware of, are we aware of our beliefs about ability and effort? So let me pause there and come back to the group to reflect on what stood out for you with that big idea, whether a highlight or a surprise of the book or the author, or we can dive right into that first idea of what are our beliefs about how our abilities shape our identity or reality. Gordon, let's go to you. What's coming up for you?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I remember going to college for the first time, and I took this interest in philosophy, and I'd never even studied philosophy before. And I thought, oh my God, this sounds so interesting, but I have no idea what this is about. So fortunately, even though I didn't know this concept, I never assumed that knew I had to develop because it was so new to me. And so that was the positive part of my beliefs shaping um, my development, because I knew that I wanted to grow in these areas. But then later in my professional career, I always had this belief about imposter syndrome. Like, oh, really, I'm not as smart as the guys who had all this background before or whatever. So I vacillated between beliefs that were disempowering and those that were empowering. And I just, that sense that those beliefs shape our reality really feels true to me.
Thank you, Gordon, for sharing that evolution of your awareness and understanding. And Colin, let's go to you. What's coming up for you in this big idea number one?
The moment that I started to try and explore my beliefs and really started reading, the frustrating thing that I came across was the subconscious nature of most of my beliefs. And it was only after a while I realized that, and I got this from Neville Goddard, that feeling is believing. And I started to learn to track my feelings in order to understand what I really believe, because I think a lot of things in my head that are so awesome, but then I feel a bunch of stuff inside my being that sometimes aren't. And I think she's really nailing something here, because so many times I've thought, oh, I'm growth mindset, but my feelings are all fixed mindset in many ways. And I think that's a really powerful thing she's bringing up here.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that and for spotlighting that, because it surprised her as well that people were sharing with her that there's false growth mindset. People are forcing it or are pretending, and they're just looking at it from not what she's specifically showing in her research. So it's good to highlight and go behind that. So awesome. Urchana, what comes up for you?
I was going to share just recently, in fact, I met my siblings for a birthday trip, and I insisted that we go to the Hoover Dam. So they actually planned and they planned the trip around the Hoover Dam. And then when it came day of, and I was like, oh, we need to and we were talking about getting tickets. And I said, you know what, let me actually look into this tour. And all of a sudden I realized there was an element of a part of the trip that may involve going through a tunnel. And all my life, I've labeled myself as a claustrophobic. I've understood myself, believed to be a claustrophobic. And here we are. And now both of them have planned a trip. And I'm like, it's day of. I can't go into panic mode now. I'm going to have to do it. Even if it is going through a tunnel, and and I watched a video and I'm like, okay, well then you're just going to work on it. You're going to watch the tunnel. You're going to prepare, and we'll get there and we'll see. But there's no going back now, and who knows, you might learn something about yourself. And I'm not a claustrophobic. I mean, I'm not as claustrophobic as I thought I was. So I tested it out. So that was I thought, an example to share as far as, I'm growing. I'm looking to change. I welcome change, if you will, even when it is terrifying.
Especially when it's terrifying, right? That's the courage that sparks all other values and virtues. And I love what you said about that, is that, identifying the ability to use and apply what we're actually learning here. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that real life example And another note I wanted to share and highlight is what Colin had mentioned about the feeling, how most of the fixed mindset comes around earlier in life as a form of self-protection system. And in the work I do with mental fitness, we really look at that as how do these sort of what we call saboteurs show up in our life to kind of keep us in a mental, psycho, social, emotional state of being that keeps us safe, which keeps us to avoid effort, avoid exposure as, I'm not really that smart, if I have to put in the effort to avoid situations that threaten that identity that we've built up for ourselves. So she does go into that growth requires feeling safe enough to not know. Gordon, what's coming up for you?
Boy, that really hits home. And Colin, when you first mentioned it too, I realized that as a child, I didn't have contact with my feelings pretty much. I grew up with this sense of not, it's got to be intellectual or it's got to be in my head, but we're not going to talk about feelings. And so a lot of times when you're to your point, I hadn't realized, I've forgotten, I've read Dweck's book a number of times, but I've forgotten that she brings in this dimension of it is when my mindset is a belief that's not grounded in my emotion. That's most often when it's a troubling or disempowering mindset. And when it's connected to how I feel, I can be with, boy, this doesn't feel right, or this does feel right, or it's like I'm much more grounded and it does feel like I'm more connected to the growth potential in it, as opposed to when that's missing, it's just like the brakes have just been shut on it. And it's like, so I think that to me, really, to me, that's the big idea that I just grabbed because it's very important. So thank you for sharing that, Colin, and Maggie for you sharing it as well.
Yeah, that's really big. And it's important to keep in mind it's not just cognitive, right? This is mindset. I mean, it's in the title, but we realize we're a whole person and it's all interconnected. So the power of emotional, and we've done so many books, right, on emotions and our relationality, like how we are interconnected with everyone in our communities. So this connects directly to so much of what's happening in our society with shaming and self-worth and a sense of belonging or lack of belonging. So this is a really big idea of how we are arriving to our sense of self-concept and identity, how failure can be interpreted as part of our identity and not feeling safe. Yeah, Urchina.
I think just going back to what you said about shame, shame is so, at least as far as when I think back in terms of my, my childhood, shame is so, when I'm operating from, I think that's part of the, in terms of relationships and how shame is, the operating system or part of the operating system. And I just, I didn't have a choice. I felt like I was stuck in a fixed mindset because of my cultural situation. And a lot of that was stemming from shame, I think. And so I really appreciate her bringing that up and you bringing that up as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Powerful emotions can lead us to be frozen or to tap into the edges of the field of courage, like you shared. So here we play, we dance with both, and we learn along the way. So that's the power of sharing our stories and our questions in this space. Beautiful. So let's move on to any other additional comments on that, or should we move on to big idea number 2? All right, let's move. Okay, so as you're moving from identity to growth, Carol Dweck shares, why waste your time proving over and over again how great you are when you could be getting better? So connecting our idea of identity from that fixed mindset and stepping into getting curious about our growth pathways, let's move into big idea number 2, which is growth comes from how we respond to challenge. And this is really wonderful because she shares that the different sort of perspectives we may have. In a fixed mindset, we tend to avoid challenges because they threaten our identity. And in a growth mindset, these challenges actually become pathways or opportunities to learn. So when we're facing that challenge, that mountain, that unknown, where are we positioned to look at what life is bringing to us? So one of the biggest shifts here is how we interpret what's happening in the day, in the life. And more importantly, how do we interpret failure? She invites us to, instead of seeing it as a reflection of who we are, we begin to see it just as data, collecting information. So as we move from personal growth to collective impact, her focus is really on this idea of becoming is better than being. So let's turn back to our co-hosts and see what's coming up for everyone.
This contrast is a big one for me. It's something I've been working on a lot recently, and the identity portion of it is the important part, because what I started to realize once I started to, well, a long time ago, recognize that so many of my beliefs are subconscious. It's only recently that I've begun to connect the feeling with the identity, and the identity is where I make my meaning. And so I really think that she's pointing to this idea that if your identity is that fixed place that needs defending, resupporting, making up for all the deficiencies that we all know we have, it's exhausting. It's just exhausting. And it's that moment where I start to take more of versus, so the fixed identity focuses on outcome, and what she's referring to as the becoming identity is focused on process. And that's the shift. Is I can just feel so much better about things when I focus on the process, because if the process is never ending, which I believe that's what we're in, is a never ending process, then if I mess something up, which inevitably I will, because I'm a human, it's okay, because I just get back up and keep on keeping on. So I think that's where she's pointing to, maybe in, well, more articulate language, but
Oh, it's perfectly said. I love it. The never-ending part of life, right? This is life. I love it. Thank you, Colin. And Gordon, what's coming up for you?
Well, I'm remembering an experience with my daughter that reflected back to an early experience for me. I remember when I was about 5 years old, I was playing Joy to the World for our whole family, and I was playing everything on the piano, and I made a mistake. And I was devastated. And I burst into tears, ran from the piano, and went upstairs and cried. And it was like, oh my God, I could never, that's how I experienced not being absolutely perfect in my performance. And that was so deep. And then flash forward many years, and I'm looking at my daughter as a kid, and she's playing the piano for a group, and she makes a mistake. She says, oh, I made a mistake. And then she just goes on playing. And I go, how can you go on like that after you've made a mistake? It was like, thankfully, somehow I'd learned enough that I could let her know that mistakes were not the end of the world. And in fact, that's how we learn. So I still like to have more of my learning be related to things I'm learning that I'm doing well and want to do better, as opposed to mistakes. But still, most of them are, oh, that wasn't it. What can I do better? So, but at least the joy to the world moment has passed.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And she really does give a lot of examples of that, how we can look at it, something happening from the fixed mindset and then something happening from the growth mindset. And I think it's so brilliant to learn from everybody else's experiences and to show us more examples of what does it look like, the same experience from a growth mindset. One of the stories I loved was this woman who got jilted at the altar. It's terrible, right? It's mortifying, right? And everybody like blames it on themselves, like I'm so embarrassed. That's an identity. But how this person reacted was amazing, right? Nicole Contis. She was picked up with a Rolls Royce. There were hundreds of people waiting at this really expensive church, right? And then the best man came up to her and said, "The groom's not coming. What would you do?" Imagine this, right? You're having a heart attack. Everybody's out there, all these expenses. And she says, I could turn to myself and feel that I'm humiliated. But that's a self identity, a self judge, right? Worth. And you know what she did? It was just, I get goosebumps. What she did, they didn't have a ceremony, of course, but they had the ceremony, the reception dinner. She changed into a little black dress, went to the party, and danced solo to the song I Will Survive. Can you just see it? Like dancing, wholehearted emotion, not taking that identity of failure in me and not taking that responsibility of someone else's action. But what I loved here is that the author shares she went into being fully into this failure. And with the social proof of those around her, instead, her good, clean pain made her able to surround herself with the love of her friends and relatives and begin the healing process. So, my friends, how often do we hide in shame and take that identity of those failures and then sit and not be in action for years? It was very powerful. The idea of failure and how that we interpret that and assume as part of our identity. I will survive. Go for it.
I just want to say for that, thank you for sharing this, Meg. I'm very moved by that. I think, my God, what resilience and what affirmation. And thank God she found it out in that moment. There was really like, whew, dodged a bullet there.
I love that, Gordon. One of my mantras from my life, I saw it when my parents, I saw them, fighting for like 10 years before they finally got a divorce. And as kids, we see truth everywhere, right? So on the wall, I literally saw they're getting a divorce. They're not happy. Why don't you just get a divorce? And it just came to me. Truth is the shortcut to the inevitable. So if you can spot the truth and suffer that clean, pure pain, you're going to jump forward, perhaps, into your more true pathway in life. It's going to be painful, maybe. Yeah, go for it, Colin.
I'm just going to say that sentence, that's a pretty awesome sentence. Did you really just get that? That's golden, Maggie.
As a kid.
Holy cow. I'm going to use it. I'll acknowledge you, but I'm going to use that.
Truth. It is. It is all around us. If we accept it or not, that's our resistance, right? And that's what turns pain into suffering. Powerful, my friends. Oh, I love that story. I had to share it. It was like, oh my God, who would have the courage to do that?
Right? Yeah, I'm with you.
So the question is, I posted this on LinkedIn just now, where are we, sitting in our contemplation, in our fixed mindset hesitancy? Whereas instead of being curious and saying, I'm just going to step in and be a part of that pathway of growth mindset, whether we know it or not, whether it's painful or not, it's much more freeing. Beautiful.
I just want to share, I'm just getting this from this whole discussion, that the idea that the truth is the doorway to that choice, being able to see it accurately, to see reality and embrace that, and then choose to act. I agree, Colin, what you're saying. That's just really powerful. So thank you for sharing that.
I love that visual.
Maggie, the one thing that you're saying that did land for me in that is, it's not just the beliefs that we hold, it's our attachment to the beliefs. Like we get so attached to it that then we are going to fight about that, or we're going to take our stands around these beliefs as opposed to, oh, I have this belief, but maybe that's not there's a way of like holding it more lightly. And when we're so attached is when I'm just speaking for myself, I guess I guess I'm saying also we're as a country, we're so attached to our different beliefs as though they define us, and they create this separation. And it's like, oh, your beliefs may be interesting, but what's that big attachment about? Can't you kind of let go a little bit of that so you can relate to other people with different beliefs?
Yeah.
Something like that. So it does. I think what you're saying is there's something about that. And anyway, I just wanted to add that piece.
Why do beliefs continue to persist is a question she went into, right? And she says, we can't grow in environments where we feel judged, exposed, or unsafe.
Mhm.
Right. So in our families or in our coworkers, if we're looking at people who just, they've got the smarts, but they're just not applying themselves, it's like instead of judging their fixed identities or characteristics or traits, we turn into that judge mode. We say, look behind the curtain. Why are they holding themselves back? Maybe they're feeling judged. They have belief systems they're not even aware of. Maybe they're feeling exposed. They don't want to look like they're not the genius that they have always been told they are. So, in some way, there's an underlying feeling, going back to what Colin was mentioning, of being unsafe to venture forward.
And I'm just going to add to what Gordon said as in terms of attachment. In my experience, personally and professionally, I've, when I've encountered a fixed mindset, it's usually this attachment that a person has. They're clinging to the story and they've been telling themselves the same story and they're clinging to that story and they're not willing to let go. There's a fear there and they're choosing to cling to that story
Mhm.
and they're choosing to suffer the consequence of, and it's really, I think it's a choice and it's a story that you keep retelling yourself.
Yep. Yep. So, people don't engage in growth, not because, they may be just stubborn. They may feel inadequate. They're hesitant to make mistakes. They fear losing the status or belonging. So, the growth mindset without safety leads to that pressure, like we were talking about earlier, the false growth mindset.
Right. And just to add, sometimes, uh, as she meant, as Carol Dweck mentioned, in examples of setbacks. I mean, setbacks are, opportunities, right, for that potential to change. So it really does depend on your reaction in these times of setbacks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people still choose sometimes to cling to the same old story in a fixed mindset.
Beautiful. Powerful conversation right here, my friends. Gordon.
Maggie, could you say more about this notion of what she had to say about false growth mindset? Because I'm not quite getting it, but I have a feeling it's something I need to understand. So could you
Okay.
say a little bit more about that?
Well, let me see if I can point to the page. But yes, she basically goes into.
Make of it. I mean, you've used it a couple of times. There's a sense that you have of it. I just want to get a feel for that.
She's done decades of research and she's shared it over and over again, the fixed and the growth mindset. And it's been working and working and working for so many people. And then quietly, she started to hear people were saying that, yeah, but it's backfiring. It's not really working. I mean, we're saying we have growth mindset, but I'm not seeing the results. So she points to saying she starts to look at the false growth mindset. So the pressure, the forcing. And she says, well, it's because what we're doing is we're looking at our perceived mental intention of having an open mind. And she
Mm,
says there's a difference between recognizing that we kind of have this fixed mindset and we have our fixed ways of seeing ourselves in the world and who's smart, who's dumb. That's kind of a fixed mindset. That's kind of clear for identity as well as our actions. Growth mindset could be kind of fuzzy if we only look at, I have an open mindset. I have a growth mindset. And in their mind, it's an open mind. I have an open mind to grow. I have an open mind to see people as flexible, as adaptable, as able to learn. But what are your actions? So, as parents, you may have an open mind in your brain, but how you're actually showing up for children is you might still be doing like complimenting them on their grades or celebrating their wins on the soccer field instead of pivoting to focusing on their efforts, their intention, their willingness to struggle with trying to adapt and try different things, and how they view failure. So that those are some of the questions that she reviewed in the book as well as others. And the last part is that she encourages people to connect. It's not just about the effort. It's also connecting it with what the outcome is. We're here to actually grow and evolve. So of course we're interested in the outcome, but we're not judging ourselves on whether we've reached the outcome. We are open and curious about the multiple pathways that we can achieve that ultimate aim.
Mhm.
And so if we have the open mindset and the intention, but we're not putting in the effort, the successful effort that is getting us towards our growth, then we're kind of not really doing growth mindset. We're playing at it. We're kicking it around. This takes work. She says this takes
Right.
work and discipline and continual. So as soon as you get that growth mindset with one thing, guess what? We're not fixed. We're not set. The whole part of growth mindset is that we're, as Colin said, it's a forever thing.
Yeah, and I think the cogs of self-reflection, accountability have to keep going. And that if this growth mindset being the mainspring, the cogs have, I mean, for me, it's just like, it's that self-reflection. And it's even even rigor. I was impressed by that. The mention of, like part of that growth mindset is open to multiple pathways of growth and introducing rigor in that. There's a inherent a potentiality there for you. No, you are capable of applying sophisticated systems, tools, and don't be afraid of that. Have the courage to try it out, right? So I think that for me was really enlivening, and I found that to be really, something that in terms of self-reflection, I'm like, and I was thinking of my fear of algebra. Sensitive. I'm like, I can't do it. I can't.
Yeah.
So, and now my daughter is going through chemistry, and I just love, love, love her mindset, her growth mindset. She's going back in there. She's like, I'm going to go back in there, and I didn't do as well as I wanted. And she's like, I'm going to retake the test. I'm like, you go, girl, because I was even the only, I mean, me growing up was like, I'm like, I just don't have it. I'm just not wired that way. I'm not wired for math. And then as I got older, I snuck into that lane of, well, I'm all geometry improves. I'm not wired that way. And that's that. These are sort of like the built-in excuses. Let me just slip into that lane, or let me go that way. And I'm like, nope. You have the ability. Do you have the commitment? Do you have the courage?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And she does go into sharing stories and examples of how the differences of girls or boys going through math, especially math and science, and how easy it is to have those beliefs from the teachers who expect the girls to not be doing well in math. And then the girls just stop. And the guys are the ones that keep struggling and keep going and keep working with math. So, that hit
Right, the
home so
confidence
hard.
gap, right? The confidence gaps. So, so, so critical.
Yes, awesome. Gordon. Oh, so Gordon, page 214, false growth mindset. That's where she
Oh, thank
focuses on
you.
that. Yeah.
So what I'm tracking with this conversation is what I would call an armchair open mindset. It's like I'll say, oh yes, I really believe that mindsets are really important. But then I get seduced into somebody who's really smart, and I just think, wow, isn't that amazing? And then instead of looking at the person who's showing growth and really feeling the same amazement, I get seduced into just, oh yeah, just being smart like that is so great. And then I miss the fact that the person's not growing. they're
Exactly.
they're smart, but they're stuck because they're just, and I'm kind of in an infatuation with their smartness. So that's my blind spot. What I'm learning is kind of going back to the habits book. Are my actual behaviors reflecting and my habits related to open mindset actually happening in my life and the way I'm reacting to people
Yeah.
as a teacher or as a role model or whatever. So big aha for me on that one. Thank you for that.
Well, I love that. And she mentions a lot in the book on the sports, and especially in the sports world, there are a lot of ideas of these fixed beliefs around the traits the natural abilities of these amazing athletes, right? So she is such a sports fan. She goes into all of these stats and all these sports teams. So I encourage you to get the book to learn more about it. So in mindset, and she quotes Michael Jordan. I'm sure you've all heard this quote, but it's worth mentioning again. We think Michael Jordan was just endowed as a superhuman star, but she says, Michael Jordan embraced his failures. In fact, in one of his favorite ads for Nike, he says, I've missed more than 9,000 shots. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. So you can be sure that each time he went back and practiced the shot 100 times. And that's the growth mindset. Not focusing on his wins and his natural abilities. He took his talent, he put in the effort, and then he iterated what's working, what's not. Boom. And you just put that on.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Colin was saying, in terms of the process. I think there is a love of process inherently, I think, in a growth mindset.
Mhm.
I'm a huge, process person, and I love watching other people's process. Um, uh, I think that's really, for me, process is key in terms of a growth mindset.
Love that. Love the process. So, big idea number 3 is looking at mindsets shape everything in life, including relationships, culture, and leadership. So, this idea of mindset expanding beyond just our brain, beyond the individual, it doesn't just affect how we see ourselves, our mental construct of self, it shapes how we also see others. So she says, in a fixed mindset, we tend to use more labels with people and to stand more in a perception of judgment of self and others. And in a growth mindset, we actually kind of shift our lens and we're searching for potential. In coaching, we say looking for the highest positive regard in others with this idea and concept of the development that everyone is able to play with and work with. So this becomes especially important in leadership, in self-leadership first, but in how we lead others and in how we show up in our relationships. Because the mindset we hold influences those environments and interactions we create. So what comes up for you guys as we look at mindset beyond the individual? Yeah, Gordon.
Yeah, the thing that comes up for me is this process of othering that I think is so predominant in our culture. It's like that's where that fixed mindset it really gets anchored in. And I'm thinking about like early tribal mentalities and the kinship. We're kin or we're not kin, and that rigidity, and then the otherness, and then all of the dynamics of our social structure that happens out of that, as opposed to seeing the potential for, oh, you know, they're not kin, but they're interesting to get to know more, or something. There's like there's so much more territory between that rigidity and how we can so easily go to that. And I think it's so deeply programmed that it's like reprogramming to this growth mindset, this process understanding of ourselves and our relationships to the others and other, so deeply important. And for the evolution of our species, so critical because it could undo us completely. It is undoing us completely, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this obviously ties back to the first big idea, but if our beliefs form the way we perceive ourselves, then they obviously form the way we perceive others, right? And that's the point that I think that once you start to embrace this reality, this idea that there's reality and there's my perception of reality, and they are never exactly aligned. The more aligned I can get to reality, the better. But it means that I can't really ever say that I see you, know you, understand you, because all I really ever get to see of you is how you show up based on your beliefs and your ideas and all that stuff. And you can actually drive yourself a little crazy here if you get all worked up about it. But at the end of the day, what it helps me to do is just keep a little bit more objectivity and say, this seems like what's happening, but I'm open to the idea that it's not. And that's helped me so much in my relationships, you know?
I love that. I think it's important to realize that sometimes we're not even aware of what we're aware of or not aware of. And that's why there's such great benefit to meet in groups, to show up in these meetings with that, at least the intention of I'm here to show up to see the different perspectives and not just come in assuming we all have the same shared beliefs, the same shared emotions showing up into that room, you know? Very powerful to understand our impact. So part of this is recognizing that we're all like we can be like little bubbles showing up in spaces, whether it's our home or communities, our workplaces, and we're all living in these little different reality bubbles. So I mean, just having that idea in mind, I think could really go a long way to help us step into just being curious, just to be open to being curious. You know, take that first little step. We don't have to agree with that other person's perspective, ideas, or beliefs, or even understand them, but to just wonder and take that step back from the fixed mindset mentality of judging first. Yeah? Yeah, Urchana.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting in the context of consensus. And I think specifically her comparison of leadership style. I think she compared a couple of CEOs, and that really resonated with me because for me that was about company culture. And I think she shared Lou Gerstner, who was the one of the former CEOs of IBM. And I remember reading his book, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance. And I found it to be such a powerful, behind the curtain, in terms of corporate culture, an examination of it, and the story and the perspective he shared. But I think that's the thing, in comparing his style and mentioning him, she talked about how, there were personally sacrifices made as a CEO just for the long run, even though it seemed that, IBM was suffering under his leadership, but that he had the long view, he was committed. And I appreciated that example that she shared. And I thought that was a powerful example in terms of growth mindset and different styles of leadership. And, it's not necessarily about consensus. It's about a personal challenge going into an environment, showing up for challenging, showing up in a challenging environment, and then how you choose to, act as a leader.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. She did talk about the impact of groupthink and how people just fall into this, they just follow the big group. And it's almost like you're lulled into this acceptance of what everybody else, you're swimming in the same pond and you're just going along with it. And so the courage and the vision it takes for these leaders who are going against the tide and who are willing to do things differently. So she does compare and contrast the leadership style of some of these CEOs, of some people that were in the Enron debacle who showed up with fixed mindset and who had the identity of I am a genius. I am, leading this multi-billion-dollar company. Everybody else is a little peon and they treat them that way. And so what happens to the culture? What happens to how people show up? And this turns into groupthink and nobody self-checks, nobody audits. And then in contrast to what you said, the beautiful story of Lou Gerstner from IBM. And then she also talks about Anne Mulcahy from Xerox. So dive into the book for that to learn the difference and who are we learning from as CEOs. It's this, I forget what the term is. She calls it like the CEO dilemma or the CEO disease, that you reach higher and higher levels of achievement And in our country, perhaps the strongest person or the most powerful person is the president of the United States, right? So when you get to a certain point, you surround yourself with a bubble of people who think the same or who may be trained by you as a perhaps fixed mindset leader, if it's a fixed mindset organization, to just go along or to only repeat what supports the leader's mentality, vision, and ideas. And if you go against it, you're going to be punished. You're not going to be advanced. So by going higher and higher, we really do give the ripple effect of how we are nurturing this environment. So it's wonderful. Read the book. There are so many amazing examples of growth mindset. And for me, heart-centered leadership examples. And these are values. How do values in action look like in different environments, in the workplace, in schools, in our communities, and in our homes? So when we learn better, when we can see one example of a different pathway, talk about freedom, opening a new door to another pathway to growth, not just for the company, the bottom line, but for everyone's personal growth as their individual values and vision for their personal excellence and growth can also be supported by the overall pathway of the company. So yes, so much goodness in here. It looks like a small book, but there's so much research and goodness in there that it took me 7 hours to read that small book because there's so much good stuff in there. Love it. Thank you for bringing that up, Archana. So powerful.
From my perspective, what we're talking about are the core issues of life. I mean, she's really pointing to the very, identity, belief, how we show up, how we relate, all of it. It's just a deep dive into the process of being a human. And it's cool that you're bringing this forth, Maggie, and sharing it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I love about this is she really is focusing as much as her research focuses on, the effort. We need to bring in effort so that we develop our natural instincts and talents and not to stay in that fixed mindset of entitlement or assumed superiority. That she says effort isn't enough because we need to bring in sort of that emotional exposure and how we show up or respond to those feelings of, this is challenging. Is that a threat? Does a threat response show up in me? Or when I see a challenge, do I, smack my hands together and say, ooh, I love a challenge. What am I going to learn? How am I going to grow? And so start with the small. We always say, start with a small habit, a small little behavior, and then test it out. She says, collect the data, find the information on what connects you, your actions, to those outcomes that are not only, achieving your outcome, but that are also good for you, good for those around you, for your company, for your organization, for the world. And so when that happens, keep doing that cog, keep, turning that wheel, as Archana was saying. So emotions, our relationality, so identity, not based on our outcomes, but on that perpetual process of becoming.
I was thinking in terms of, the potentiality of leaning into our inadequacies. There's so much there as a treasure. Seeing our inadequacies as really a treasure of things that we do need to. It's really getting in touch with the feelings of our inadequacy, right? And that's that potential for self-discovery. I think that's the other thing for me is just like, wait, there's more. There are more layers to me. I think that's for me was exciting. I'm still growing. There's still that I'm not. I'm not affixed in this my way of. This is it. Just as I shared earlier, but. Wait, I've been telling myself I'm a claustrophobic and I can't do this, and who knows how many other adventures I've missed out on, but I did. I put on my lab coat. I'm like, well, just go in there and see what happens. I'm not gonna shy away from this. I'm not gonna get scared. I'm not gonna now, after talking all this time about going to the Hoover Dam, saying, nope, sorry, I made a mistake. I'm gonna give this a try. So I think that's where, again, it was incredibly, freeing. What an incredibly, amazing experience to know that I had thought of myself in a certain way, fixed, and here I was like, oh, there's potential, there's potential for so many other things here.
Yep. I love that. Focus on potential, right? Instead of just what is and then start to judge it. How can we look at effort a little bit different? Not just try harder, but stay with, like you said, the discomfort of growth. So it's not just about doing more, it's about what we're willing to feel while we're doing it, especially those things that put us just slightly out of our zone of comfort. Awesome. Love it. Well, as we begin to wrap up, I want to thank Colin and Urchina and Gordon for being a part of this amazing conversation today. And to anyone who's joining us online, thank you for being part of this space. Because, here in our Cafecito Chats, we don't just read books, as amazing as they are, right? We bring them to life through these shared and open reflections and through sharing our lived experiences, the real stuff that's coming up for us. And what makes them really meaningful, it's not just the ideas themselves, but how they begin to show up in our everyday lives as we begin to think, respond, connect, and slowly integrate these into our lives. So we always encourage you to jot down what stood out for you today. So whether you're grabbing your worksheet or your piece of paper, as you move through your week, you might just sit with this question. So where in your life are you still trying to prove yourself instead of allowing yourself to grow, to learn, to explore? So just noticing that, being aware of what the potential might be, can begin to shift everything. So before we close, I'd love to hear from you guys if what might be your big takeaway, anything stood out for you from our discussions. So I'd love to come back and check in with you guys before we wrap up.
I guess more than anything, it's just a reaffirmation of so much of what it kind of. There are so many people who are so satisfied with their fixed identity that the idea of even opening to another idea is threatening. It makes them feel uncomfortable. And I'm just so grateful to have had the opportunity to have the experiences that lead to the wisdom that she shares in this book. The wisdom that she shares in this book is essential, fundamental to being able to focus, to deal with life, because I don't care who you are, life does not roll on a fixed linear process. It is always seeming like coming out of left field and random and all over the place. And being a fixed identity is just hard.
Exhausting, right?
So, yeah, thanks for sharing.
And that connects to what we talked about last week, right? In the power of habit, how life isn't a straight line. It could be like stepping stones. That's like a scatter plot. You don't know what's going to fit together. So I love how these books are just tying in. So Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I found it really interesting and revealing, frankly, when she discussed relationships. I think that's where, for myself at least, I don't know if this is necessarily the case, but I wondered if I had a false growth mindset in some relationships where I thought I was the growth mindset person. When in fact, I think that's where for me it was really, there was some accounting that I have to accountability for that matter, that it really forced me to look at. And that perhaps that in some relationships and contexts, I had been the fixed, I had a fixed mindset. So that was, again, that truth that we were discussing earlier. So it was really powerful. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that it, held a mirror to that as well.
Yep.
So thank you again.
Thank you for highlighting that. Again, so many great chapters, a whole chapter on relationships, many examples again of what does a fixed mindset look like in a relationship? What does a growth mindset look like in a relationship? And I love her examples she gives, to actually like try this with your significant other and see how it shifts. Don't think there's no chance. Just explore. And I too found it very impactful reading some of those chapters. So thank you for sharing that. And so before we wrap up, I want to just kind of bring in this new perspective, because we here love to look at how do we show up with this amazing book, all that we shared, but from our different perspective. If we have any new questions that open up and expand how these ideas can be applied, because because even though it's based on research and all these amazing things, we're all different. And she even said that, one small aspect of this is that you can do all these studies, but she says it does matter, like people's temperament. The difference of a person's individual temperament does impact the fixed mindset and growth mindset. And to me, I don't know how what's coming up for you guys, but I started to think about, I want to bring in these ideas of from a more whole person, holistic perspective, from a cultural idea of who are we as an energetic being, from my lens, Ayurveda. How do we view ourselves as a different individual energy? And how does this relate to me? So, for me, the idea of effort is wonderful, but it's not for everybody. Some people can be really exhausted if they're always looking at effort without also looking at the balancing of rest. So for me, I found I'm curious what she would say about effort and rest. And looking at the different constitutions of the individuals that were being studied. Because we can look at people as examples, but if we don't look at the source of, that individual has all these personal characteristics and traits, and if we try to compare ourselves to other people, we can really run amok on trying to apply the same wisdom without first starting with the first step, which is, who am I? Who am I as the individual expression of the universal energy, if you want to put it that way. Next week, we're going to get into this a little bit more, but just opening this up, of the impact of focus on effort, as the only pathway to growth. I know we could go on another hour. Urchana, what's coming up for you?
I was just going to say, for me, going forward, as I shared earlier, when you first shared this book with me years ago when we met, I think I've been applying a growth mindset. I hope, I think. And moving forward now, here I am 5 years later, and, in the context of aging, that for me has really been a point of reflection. Like, how am I going to henceforth continue to am I really going to, because that's the whole thing, as Colin mentioned, this is forever. This is every day. It's not just, oh, well, great, I have a growth mindset and yay, I'm can I keep this going? Can I keep these cogs and wheels turning? And that's where it's just like, okay, so we're aging. What are we going to do about that? That's a great thing. We're lucky to be aging, yay. So, and I think that's where, for me, effort is just like, well, okay, if I'm looking at others and how they're aging, it's not about the other necessarily what they're doing, but in terms of taking, as an athlete, taking that athletic mindset of like other people's playbooks. I'm like, I applaud this person's, effort. And then it makes me show up in a different way, and not necessarily competitive, but I'm just competing with myself, competing with that fixed mindset of myself at a certain age. Oh, I'm aging. Oh, well, I'm aging, and then I say to myself, that's not good enough, really. And then leaning into that and questioning, and again, auditing that inadequacy or that feeling of inadequacy, and really, challenging myself, and leaning in also to the and celebrating potentiality of aging, the beauty of aging.
Yeah. I think we're in a new era for that, right? There's a magazine, Ageist, which really celebrates individuals in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and more. And so we need these new role models. We need these new visions of what's possible. Just because it hasn't been done or we haven't been taught doesn't mean that we can't show up in these new and amazing ways. I love it. So for me, it put into that curiosity of yes, growth mindset is awesome and each person is unique. So it goes even further into that layer of curiosity about who is this person? Whether it's an individual, a group, at a corporation that we're working with, to understand that the beliefs, there's so much underneath that we can get curious about and that contributes to how they are showing up or their fixed mindset or growth mindset tendencies. So rich, amazing. This book, get it. It was just so, so amazing, you guys. Thank you again for this rich conversation. I always appreciate the depth and perspective that each of you bring. And for those listeners, if this conversation resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe, like the channel, and please share it so more people can join us each week. And you're welcome to download today's reflection worksheet using the QR code on the screen. And subscribe to our newsletter if you'd like to receive future sessions and resources for each of our weekly topics. And we'd love to invite you to join us next time. We're going to look at this amazing book, Spiritual Economics by Eric Butterworth. One of my faves. I read it maybe twice already, so I'm starting to read it again for my third time. I can't wait to get into this book. Next week, Spiritual Economics by Eric Butterworth. So what we're creating here is more than just conversations about books. It's really just a space of return, a place to come back to ourselves, to one another, and to what matters most. So if something from today stayed with you, carry it with you. Carry it into the week ahead. Maybe a small new practice you want to explore, a question you want to sit with, or simply a new way of noticing. And as always, give yourself a moment to pause, because here in Pause and Pivot, we pause not to stop, but to pivot toward what matters. So thank you again for joining. Be well. Until next time. Bye-bye.